When I first moved into the quiet countryside neighborhood, I thought I had finally found my escape from city chaos. A few acres of land, a sturdy house, and no binding rules of any homeowners association. Just the kind of freedom I had been searching for. My property stood at the very edge of an HOA-controlled community, close enough to share the road, but far enough to remain outside their legal grip. Or so I believed. It didn't take long for Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, to make her appearance. She showed up with a clipboard, an air of entitlement, and the assumption that I had no choice but to bow to her authority. She insisted that my property was under the spirit of the HOA, even though county records clearly showed otherwise. Her frustration only grew when I politely but firmly told her I wanted nothing to do with her association, her fees, or her long list of rules. Over the next few weeks, her presence became a constant shadow. She parked outside my gate, taking pictures of my home. She criticized the color of my shed, the placement of my firewood stack, even the way I cut my grass. Neighbors whispered about how Karen had driven out families before, using harassment until they gave in, but I wasn't like the others. The breaking point came one evening when I returned home to find a letter pinned to my gate. It wasn't an invitation, it was a demand. Join the HOA within 30 days or face consequences. The threat was thinly veiled, but it was there. I laughed it off at first, assuming it was another bluff. But the way Karen glared from across the road as I crumpled the paper made it clear. She wasn't done. She was planning something bigger, something far more aggressive, and I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go to force me under her control. The calm before the storm was over. The next chapter of this battle would begin at my gate. It started on a Saturday morning. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I saw a pair of unfamiliar trucks pull up outside my gate. 3 men stepped out, large, heavy-set, and carrying themselves with the swagger of people who thought intimidation was a profession. They weren't neighbors. That much was obvious. They leaned against the gate, rattling the chain, peering toward my property as if they already owned it. One of them pulled out a folded paper, an official notice bearing the HOA's letterhead. I didn't need to read it to know it was another attempt to force compliance. But this time, instead of Karen's shrill demands, she had brought muscle. The men shouted across the property line, demanding that I come out and discuss terms. Their arrogance was matched only by their ignorance, because what they didn't realize was that my land wasn't just fenced, it was fortified. My gate was reinforced steel, anchored deep into concrete, and it wasn't going anywhere. They could rattle it all they wanted. It would hold. Still, the message was clear. Karen had escalated the fight. She had sent thugs to do her bidding, thinking fear would break me. Instead, it sparked something else inside me. I walked calmly back into the house, opened my cabinet, and retrieved the shotgun I kept for protection. When I stepped back onto the porch, I didn't need to say a word. The sight of that weapon resting confidently in my hands was enough to change the men's expressions from smug to uneasy. They realized quickly that the intimidation game had shifted. This wasn't a defenseless homeowner they could bully. This was someone who knew his rights and was prepared to defend them. After a few tense minutes, the men retreated, grumbling as they climbed back into their trucks. But I knew they'd be back. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. This was only the opening round of her desperate campaign. And when she came again, she would bring more than thugs. She would bring the law, or at least try to twist it to her will. The following week, Karen doubled down. She began a smear campaign, spreading rumors to anyone who would listen. According to her, I was an uncooperative recluse, a dangerous neighbor, even a criminal. Flyers appeared on mailboxes warning about the unstable man with guns who refused to obey the community's rules. But while her lies spread, I stayed focused. I reinforced my gate, added cameras, and made sure everything I did was by the book. My property taxes were current, my permits were in order, and the sheriff's office already knew I was well within my rights to stand my ground. Karen, however, wasn't satisfied with gossip. A few days later, she arrived again, this time with a larger group. Some were board members, others were likely friends she had roped into her crusade. They crowded outside my fence, waving paperwork and shouting accusations. They threatened fines, legal action, and even hinted at seizing my property through liens. But what Karen failed to grasp was that her HOA had no jurisdiction here. Her legal notices were nothing more than glorified paperweights on my side of the property line. I let her rant, her voice growing shriller by the minute, while my security cameras recorded every second. Then she made her mistake. She called the sheriff herself, convinced that law enforcement would back her crusade. She strutted around, declaring that I would finally be forced into compliance once the deputies arrived. What she didn't realize was that I had already spoken to the sheriff days earlier. They knew my situation. They knew Karen's history. and they had warned her more than once to stop harassing people outside HOA jurisdiction. So when the patrol car finally pulled up, Karen's confidence began to crack. She expected backup. What she got was accountability, and in that moment, the fight reached its turning point. The sheriff wasn't here for me. He was here for her. The deputies stepped out of their vehicle with calm authority, their eyes sweeping over the growing crowd. Karen rushed forward, waving her stack of HOA papers as if they were court orders. She pointed toward my house, demanding immediate enforcement. But the deputies weren't swayed by her theatrics. They asked for property records, and I was ready. With a folder I had prepared days earlier, I handed over every document proving my land was private, outside HOA boundaries, and free from their reach. The deputies examined the papers, nodded, and turned their attention back to Karen. Her protests grew louder, more desperate. She accused me of being hostile, of brandishing weapons, of endangering the neighborhood. But the deputies already had access to my security footage, which I had shared with them in advance. The video clearly showed the thugs rattling my gate, the threats shouted across my property line, and me standing calmly on my porch with my shotgun lowered, never once pointing it at anyone. The tide shifted instantly. The deputies told Karen and her followers to disperse, reminding them that trespassing and harassment carried real consequences. They warned her directly that further attempts to intimidate me could result in charges. Karen's face turned red with rage, but her power had evaporated. Without her thugs, without legal standing, and without the sheriff's support, she was exposed as nothing more than a bully. One by one, her supporters drifted away, embarrassed to have been part of her scheme. As the patrol car pulled away, Karen stood alone outside my gate, her fury boiling over. She shouted threats about lawsuits, about revenge, about how this wasn't over. But her words carried no weight anymore. Everyone had seen her lose. For the first time since moving in, I felt true peace settle over my property. My land was mine, my freedom intact, and Karen's reign of intimidation shattered. The battle was over, and the sheriff had delivered the final blow. But the story of Karen's downfall would echo through the neighborhood for years to come.